But to understand the destructive power held within that slim folder, we must rewind. We need to travel back to a time before the fall. A time when the Blackwood name wasn't a whisper in a scandal sheet, but a roar that echoed through the hallowed halls of finance and society. It was a name synonymous with absolute power, unshakable prestige, and a legacy carved from generations of ambition. Reputation isn't bought with money. It's forged in steel and blood, and you protect it with your life. Those words uttered by his father, Alistair Blackwood, were more than just advice. They were a commandment etched into Damien Blackwood's very soul since childhood. They echoed in the vast, cold corridors of the Blackwood ancestral home, a sprawling stone monument to centuries of dominance. The Blackwood Holdings story began, like many great empires, with a seed of daring, a single ship braving treacherous waters in the 19th century. From that humble origin, generations of Blackwoods, each more cunning and ruthless than the last, had expanded their reach. They built an empire that spanned continents, with fingers in everything from global shipping and luxury hotels to cutting-edge technology and, ironically, philanthropy. Blackwood Holdings wasn't just a business, it was a dynasty. Damien was born into this world of immense pressure and suffocating expectation. His upbringing wasn't filled with childish games, but with lessons in power dynamics, taught over breakfast while scanning stock market reports. His playgrounds were boardrooms. His playmates were the sons and daughters of global leaders. Alistair, a man whose presence could silence a room, ensured his son understood the weight of the name he carried. Every handshake, every public appearance, every decision was scrutinized under the harsh glare of preserving the Blackwood legacy. It was a relentless, unforgiving education. And Damien, to all outward appearances, was the perfect heir. Tall, impossibly handsome, with a mind as sharp as a shard of ice, and a charm that could disarm even his fiercest rivals, he moved through this world with an air of effortless command. He excelled at Eton, conquered Oxford, and seemed destined to not just fill his father's shoes, but to bronze them for posterity. No one doubted his capability. But beneath the polished Savile Row suits and the easy smiles, a fire raged, a restless, gnawing ambition. Damien wasn't content merely to protect the legacy, he craved to surpass it. He looked at the vast Blackwood Holdings and saw not an endpoint, but a launching pad. He dreamt of audacious acquisitions, of forging alliances that would shatter old paradigms, of transforming the family name from merely powerful to untouchable. He wanted more. He always wanted more. He would often stand alone in the cavernous study, dominated by a towering portrait of Alistair, his father's steely eyes seeming to follow him. Damien would clench his fists, a silent vow forming in his mind. "I won't just protect it, father," he'd think, the ambition a physical ache in his chest. "I'll make it greater than you ever imagined, whatever the cost." The pressure was immense, a constant companion, but it fueled his drive, pushing him toward a future he believed he controlled absolutely. He believed the path to glory was clearly laid out, a golden road paved by his ancestors. But he hadn't factored in fate or the disruptive, unpredictable power of the human heart. He couldn't have known that destiny was about to take a sharp, perilous turn. All because of a woman from Viridia, a woman who would walk into his life carrying both intoxicating passion and the seeds of a storm that would threaten to tear everything down. That fateful encounter happened at a dazzling art exhibition in Viridia, a city humming with passion and history. Damien was there, officially, to scout potential acquisitions for the Blackwood Foundation's ever-growing collection. Unofficially, he was bored. He moved through the glittering crowd with practiced ease, but his eyes held a detached air. Until he saw her. Isabella Rossi wasn't just beautiful. She radiated an energy that cut through the polite murmurs and clinking glasses. She engaged in a fierce debate with an art critic, her voice passionate, her arguments sharp. She wasn't just present, she was alive. She had a fiery intellect, a Viridian spirit, and a legacy almost as formidable as his own. She was the daughter of the legendary Augusto Rossi, a man who had built a luxury automotive empire from scratch, a titan of industry known for his shrewdness and fierce independence. He was new money, perhaps, compared to the centuries-old Blackwood name, but his power was undeniable, and his love for his daughter, fierce. Was it love at first sight? Or was it the strategic recognition of a perfect alliance, a merger not just of hearts but of empires? Perhaps it was both. Damien, used to women who fawned or feared, was captivated by her sharp wit and her absolute refusal to be intimidated by his name. When he approached her, she met his gaze head-on. "Mr. Blackwood," she'd said, a hint of challenge in her smile, "your collection is impressive, but does it possess anything with a soul?" Isabella, in turn, saw beyond the Blackwood facade to a man with a compelling, if perhaps dangerous, ambition that mirrored her own drive. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance played out across continents, culminating in a wedding on the shores of the breathtaking Lake Serafina. The wedding was hailed as the event of the decade. It was a spectacle of obscene wealth and power, a carefully orchestrated display designed to solidify the Blackwood-Rossi the union, in the eyes of the world. Think multi-million-euro budgets, guest lists dripping with royalty and billionaires, and media coverage that spanned the globe. Yet, even as champagne flowed and flashbulbs popped, Augusto Rossi pulled his daughter aside. Amidst the deafening chorus of congratulations, his voice was a low, urgent whisper in her ear. "Remember who you are, Isabella. Remember you are a Rossi. Never let the Blackwood halo blind you." A chilling premonition, perhaps. He knew the world his daughter was entering, its glittering surface and its dark undercurrents. For a time, it seemed like a fairy tale. The tabloids couldn't get enough of the golden couple. Their carefully curated social media feeds painted a picture of blissful partnership and shared dreams. But fairy tales rarely last in the rarefied air of the super-rich. The cracks began to appear. Slowly, insidiously. Damien, driven by his insatiable ambition, plunged deeper into the labyrinthine world of Blackwood Holdings. His days became a blur of board meetings, international flights, and high-stakes negotiations. He was rarely home. Isabella, determined not to be a mere trophy wife, poured her energy into her own passions, philanthropy, her burgeoning sustainable fashion line. She tried to carve her own space, to bring her viridian fire to the often stuffy traditions of the Blackwood clan, but she often felt like an exotic bird in a very old, very gilded cage. But their worlds drifted. Dinners became solitary affairs under cavernous ceilings, the silence broken only by the distant chime of an antique clock. Whispered promises were replaced by urgent transatlantic phone calls. Romantic weekends were canceled for unavoidable meetings. The sprawling Blackwood estate, once a symbol of their future, began to feel like a beautiful prison. Isabella would often find herself standing by the vast windows overlooking Lake Serafina, the water shimmering under the moon, and wonder, was this truly the life she had envisioned? Was the price of being Mrs. Blackwood a slow, suffocating loneliness? The Rannet, the first hairline fracture in their perfect marriage, had appeared. And in the shadows, temptation began to stir. The loneliness that settled around Isabella like a fine, cold mist, unfortunately, became fertile ground for temptation to take root, just as a mysterious figure from the east entered the picture. The loneliness that settled around Isabella like a fine cold mist, unfortunately, became fertile ground for temptation to take root, just as a mysterious figure from the east entered the picture. Her name was Anastasia Volkov, and she wasn't just any woman. She doesn't just want his money, Damien. She wants his soul. Jasper, the aging, loyal Blackwood family butler, a man who had seen generations of Blackwood's rise and fall, had warned his young master. Damien, of course, blinded by arrogance and the thrill of the new, had merely laughed it off. "Jasper, you worry too much. She's a diversion." But Jasper knew. Oh, he knew. He'd seen that predatory glint in a woman's eyes before. Anastasia Volkov. The name itself seemed to slither off the tongue, exotic and dangerous. Her origins were shrouded in whispers and half-truths. Some said she was the daughter of a disgraced oligarch from St. Petersburg, cast out and seeking to reclaim her fortune. Others whispered of connections to shadowy international syndicates. What was undeniable was her beauty, a cool, almost reptilian perfection, with eyes like chips of Siberian ice that seemed to see right through you, to pinpoint your deepest vulnerabilities. She possessed a razor-sharp intellect, a chameleon-like ability to adapt to any social situation, and a charm that could melt glaciers. Or so it seemed. Their paths crossed, as such paths often do in their world, at a lavish charity auction. It was an event hosted by the Blackwood Foundation, naturally. Damien, bored by the endless parade of sycophants and the predictable bidding wars, found his attention snagged by a woman who stood apart from the glittering Ethelberg city crowd. Anastasia. She was representing some nebulous Russian philanthropic group and had donated a breathtaking Fabergé egg, a piece so rare it caused a collective gasp when unveiled. Damien, intrigued by her porcelain complexion, her regal poise, and an almost palpable aura of mystery, introduced himself. Their initial conversation was brief, charged with an unspoken energy. Business cards were exchanged, hers a stark, minimalist design with only a name and an untraceable number. Fleeting glances lingered a moment too long. He found her utterly intoxicating, a stark contrast to Isabella's warm, viridian passion. Anastasia was all cool calculation and enigmatic smiles. One dinner, ostensibly to discuss further philanthropic collaborations, became two. Then clandestine weekends, masquerading as urgent business trips to Geneva or Hong Kong. In dimly lit suites, with the city lights of some far-flung metropolis twinkling below, Anastasia would listen, really listen, to Damien's grand ambitions for Blackwood Holdings. She wouldn't just flatter, she'd offer insightful, almost unnervingly astute observations. She laughed at his jokes with a throaty, seductive chuckle, praised his visionary outlook, and made him feel like the most important, most desired man in the world, a feeling he was beginning to realize he no longer consistently got from his wife. In return, he lavished her with gifts, rare art pieces that quietly disappeared from auction previews, Cartier bracelets clasped onto her slender wrist in the dead of night, whispered promises of a future where they could be together, away from prying eyes and complications. For Damien, it was an escape, a thrilling, ego-stroking dalliance. For Anastasia, it was something far more, a calculated dance. She saw in Damien Blackwood not just a lover, but a golden ticket, a powerful piece in a game only she seemed to fully understand. Here was a man weighed down by the outlook, pressure of a legacy older than anyone could remember. She found it tantalizing to know she could draw him away from that well-bred world, to be the one who understood the restless ambition that gnawed at him. It gave her a sense of triumph. Yet, even as she played her part, there were moments. Late one night, in their Ethelberg city penthouse, as Damien slept, Anastasia stood by the window, a silhouette against the glittering skyline. Her phone, a sleek, encrypted device, buzzed softly. The call was in rapid-fire Russian. Her responses were curt, her face, usually a mask of serene composure, tightened with a flicker of, was it concern? Or something harder? Curiosity element 1. She ended the call abruptly, her gaze drifting back to the sleeping Damien. A small, almost cruel smile touched her lips. "You're just a pawn, Damien, my love," she thought, the endearment a silken lie. A very handsome, very powerful pawn in a much, much larger game. The Camdo temptation was complete, the Nguiting affair in full, dangerous swing. While Damien was blissfully, arrogantly tumbling deeper into Anastasia's silken web, he remained oblivious to the storm clouds gathering back home. He had no idea that the foundations of his gilded world were beginning to crack, not from an external threat, but from within his own marriage, from a wife who was slowly, painfully awakening to the truth. While Damien was blissfully, arrogantly tumbling deeper into Anastasia's silken web, he remained oblivious to the storm clouds gathering back home. He had no idea that the foundations of his gilded world were beginning to crack, not from an external threat, but from within his own marriage, from a wife who was slowly, painfully awakening to the truth. The irony was cruel. Just as the emotional chasm between Damien and Isabella Rossi widened into an unbridgeable gulf, she discovered she was pregnant, with the Blackwood heir. The news should have been a joyous occasion, a new chapter for the celebrated couple. And for Isabella, it was, in a bittersweet way. A wave of fierce, protective love washed over her for the tiny life growing within. She fantasized briefly that perhaps this child, their child, would be the anchor Damien needed, the thing to pull him back from the brink, to remind him of the vows they'd made under the viridian sun by Lake Serafina. But as her belly swelled, Damien's presence remained as elusive as ever. His excuses for his absences became flimsier, his attention more fleeting. The rationale in their honian deepened. It was in this emotional vacuum, this chilling loneliness, that the whispers began. At first, they were just that. Subtle remarks from her loyal personal staff, a worried glance from Maria, her longtime Viridian maid who had come with her to Ethelberg City. An unusual late-night call Damien took in hushed tones on the terrace. A sudden, unexplained change to his itinerary for a supposed business trip to Zurich. Small things. Easily dismissed, if one wanted to. Then the whispers grew bolder, harder to ignore. Maria, her face etched with concern, accidentally mentioned a string of exorbitant florist bills for bouquets Isabella never received. Then came the moment that shattered Isabella's carefully constructed denial. "This earring is not mine, Damien, and it certainly doesn't belong to any of the staff in this house." Isabella's voice was ice, her hand trembling slightly as she held up the glittering diamond stud. She'd found it nestled in the pocket of one of his tuxedo jackets, discarded carelessly after a late night at the office. It was small, elegant, and most definitely not hers. Damien, caught off guard, sputtered a series of unconvincing denials. It was a misunderstanding. A gift for a client's wife, perhaps misplaced. He even tried to gaslight her, suggesting her pregnancy was making her overly suspicious, emotional. "You're imagining things, Isabella. Stress isn't good for the baby, you know." For a fleeting moment, staring into his earnest, pleading eyes, she almost believed him. Wanted to believe him. Desperately. But the seed of doubt, once planted, had taken root. It gnawed at her. The beautiful facade of their life began to crumble, revealing the ugly truth beneath. Suspicious credit card bills started to appear. Extravagant purchases at Parisian boutiques she hadn't visited in months. 5-star hotel stays in cities Damien claimed he was merely passing through. Private jet logs that didn't quite align with the business trips he meticulously documented. Subtleties only a sharp mind like Isabella's, a mind honed by her father, Augusto Rossi, could detect and piece together. The final, crushing fat hit and discovery came when Maria, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and loyalty, discreetly left a candid photograph on Isabella's vanity. It wasn't from the paparazzi. It was a clear, undeniable shot. Damien, arm in arm with Anastasia Volkov, stepping out of the opulent lobby of the Four Seasons in New York, a city he'd claimed he hadn't visited for a business meeting just the week before. They were laughing, intimate. Anastasia's head was resting on his shoulder. It was a portrait of betrayal. The world tilted. The air rushed from Isabella's lungs. The beautiful dream had shattered into a million jagged pieces. There would be no more denial, only cold hard bunchen, evidence. Her initial confrontation with Damien that night was a storm of tears and accusations, met with his now familiar blend of indignant denials and smooth apologies. He was a master manipulator, after all. He almost had her believing it was all a misunderstanding, a cruel trick of the light, paparazzi sensationalism. Almost. But something inside Isabella had shifted. The Rossi fire, long dormant under the Blackwood chill, began to burn. She would not be a victim. She would not be a fool. She began to collect her bunchun evidence methodically. Every photograph, every unexplained bill, every discrepancy in his stories. Quietly, secretly. During one of her increasingly rare visits to the vast, dusty Blackwood family library, a place Damien rarely frequented, she stumbled upon an old, leather-bound nut-key diary. It belonged to Eleanor Blackwood, Damien's long-deceased mother. Most of it was mundane, the scribblings of a lonely society wife. But then, tucked between pressed flowers and faded ink, were a few cryptic entries. References to archaic protections, the Blackwood bride's leverage, and a legacy clause designed to shield the family and its wives from ruinous folly, Ilment too. Isabella's heart hammered. What did it mean? Could this be the weapon she so desperately needed? Her heart now a battlefield of simmering rage and profound heartbreak, Isabella Rossi knew the time for illusions was over. She remembered the man who had wooed her with single red roses and promises of a shared brilliant future. That man was gone. In his place stood a stranger, a betrayer. She had a child to protect, a family name, her family name, to uphold, and a devastation to avenge. The stage was being set. All she needed was the perfect moment, the perfect spotlight, to bring the curtain down on Damien Blackwood's charade. And as fate would have it, that spotlight was just around the corner, in the form of the grandest, most public event of the Ethelberg City social calendar. Her heart now a battlefield of simmering rage and profound heartbreak. Isabella Rossi knew the time for illusions was over. She remembered the man who had wooed her with single red roses and promises of a shared, brilliant future. That man was gone. In his place stood a stranger, a betrayer. She had a child to protect, a family name, her family name, to uphold, and a devastation to avenge. The stage was being set. All she needed was the perfect moment, the perfect spotlight, to bring the curtain down on Damian Blackwood's charade. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed an ally, a powerful one. She needed her father. Augusto Rossi, the Viridian Lion, was not a man to be trifled with. He had clawed his way to the pinnacle of the automotive world with grit, intelligence, and an almost terrifying ruthlessness when crossed. When Isabella, pale but resolute, finally confessed the entirety of Damian's betrayal during a clandestine meeting in his Viridian palazzo, the meeting arranged with the secrecy of a state affair, his reaction was volcanic. "We will not just reclaim what is yours, Isabella," Augusto Rossi declared, his voice a low growl that vibrated with controlled fury. He slammed a heavy fist onto the ancient oak table in his study, the sound echoing the tremor in Isabella's heart. "We will bring him to his knees. He will learn what it means to disrespect a Rossi, to disrespect my daughter." The air crackled with his protective rage. There was no patience in Augusto for men who mistreated his daughter, especially not a Blackwood who thought his ancient name gave him carte blanche for cruelty. Within hours, the Rossi legal machine, a formidable beast in its own right, was activated. Augusto summoned his most trusted lawyers, a team of legal sharks renowned throughout Europe for their tenacity and their ability to dissect complex financial structures like a surgeon with a scalpel. He flew them to Ethelberg City, installing them in a discreet suite of offices far from prying Blackwood eyes. Their brief was simple: find every weakness, every forgotten clause, every hidden vulnerability within the labyrinthine structure of Blackwood Holdings. And find it they did. Giancarlo Rossi, Augusto's nephew and a brilliant, razor-sharp legal mind who specialized in archaic European trust law, took the lead. He listened intently as Isabella recounted the cryptic entries from Eleanor Blackwood's Nut-Key diary, the archaic protections, the legacy clause. A flicker of recognition lit his eyes. "These old families," Giancarlo mused, a predatory smile playing on his lips. "They often had interesting ways of protecting their assets and their women from less scrupulous heirs." The legal team plunged into a maelstrom of centuries-old documents, trust deeds yellowed with age, and prenuptial agreements so complex they would make a sphinx weep. They worked around the clock, fueled by Viridian espresso and Augusto Rossi's relentless drive. And then Giancarlo found it. Buried deep within the original Blackwood family trust, reaffirmed and subtly amended by Augusto's own wily lawyers at the time of the Honyan marriage, a spousal misconduct clause. An ancient, almost forgotten de Quantinthak trust clause that stipulated if the reigning Blackwood heir was proven to have engaged in egregious marital misconduct or endangered the rightful inheritance of his issue, significant controlling interest in several key Blackwood properties and ventures, properties tied to the original family holdings, would revert to the wronged spouse, especially if that spouse came from a family of equal or greater standing, bringing a substantial dowry or alliance, as Isabella had. It was a relic from an era when aristocratic marriages were as much about consolidating power as they were about love, and it was, quite simply, dynamite. The Kehach plan began to form, cold, precise, and devastating. First, irrefutable proof of Damian's infidelity and his reckless endangerment of the Blackwood-Rossi alliance. Isabella already had a considerable amount of that. Then, the careful preparation of legal documents, cross-referencing British and Viridian law to ensure their validity. And finally, the perfect stage for the denouement. The upcoming annual Blackwood Foundation Gala, the glittering jewel in Ethelberg City's social crown, an event Damian was planning to use to subtly introduce Anastasia Volkov to his world. It was poetic, it was brutal, it was perfect. Augusto Rossi looked at his daughter, his eyes now gleaming with a cold, strategic light. "He intends to parade his whore at your event, Isabella? Good, let him. He will find himself the star of a very different kind of show." While Isabella and her father were meticulously sharpening their blades, Damien, cocooned in his arrogance and the intoxicating allure of Anastasia, remained blissfully unaware of the tempest about to break. He was too busy orchestrating what he believed would be his own night of triumph. While Isabella and her father were meticulously sharpening their blades, Damien, cocooned in his arrogance and the intoxicating allure of Anastasia Volkov, remained blissfully unaware of the tempest about to break. He was too busy orchestrating what he believed would be his own night of triumph, a night that would solidify his power and, perhaps more importantly to his ego, subtly introduce Anastasia to the Ethelberg city elite. Tonight will be the most memorable Gala the Blackwood Foundation has ever hosted, Damien Blackwood declared with a dismissive wave of his hand to the nervous event planning committee. They'd been fluttering around him for weeks, fretting over floral arrangements and seating charts for the annual charity ball, the crown jewel of Ethelberg City's social calendar. He, however, had other things on his mind. He didn't know, couldn't possibly imagine, just how memorable it would be, and for all the wrong reasons. The Grand Sovereign Hotel, an establishment dripping with old-world opulence and discreet scandal, was abuzz with activity for days leading up to the event. Thousands of imported orchids and calla lilies were being artfully arranged into towering centerpieces. Velvet ropes and gleaming stanchions were meticulously placed. The guest list was a veritable who's who of global power. Titans of industry, media moguls, European aristocracy, even a rumored contingent from the Vatican. Invitations were more coveted than shares in a skyrocketing IPO. And amidst all this frantic cheek preparation, the most notable absence was Isabella Rossi. Her name was conspicuously missing from the list of key organizers, a role she had always played with grace and meticulous attention to detail. Whispers filled the gilded corridors of the Grand Sovereign and the hushed drawing rooms of Ethelberg's elite. Was Mrs. Blackwood unwell? Had the pressures of her pregnancy become too much? Or was there perhaps a deeper, more troubling reason for her seclusion? The Blackwood staff, a notoriously tight-lipped bunch, offered only vague, unsatisfying answers, fueling the rumor mill further. "Mrs. Blackwood is focusing on personal matters," was the official, chillingly polite line. Damien Blackwood, of course, encouraged these speculations. Her absence suited his KH plan perfectly. This gala wasn't just about charity. It was about projecting an image of himself as the undisputed, visionary leader of Blackwood Holdings, a man in complete control. And more discreetly, it was about parading Anastasia Volkov, his trusted business associate from the East, in front of the wealthiest and most influential people on the planet. He envisioned her, draped in jewels, subtly by his side, a silent testament to his desirability, his power. Anastasia Volkov, for her part, was an intoxicating mix of nerves and exhilaration. She knew this was her moment, her grand debut of sorts. She'd selected a gown of black velvet embroidered with intricate gold filigree that shimmered like captured starlight, a custom creation from a Viridian designer friend, a subtle nod to Isabella, perhaps? Or just a coincidence? She'd booked her own lavish suite at the Grand Sovereign, wanting to maintain an illusion of independence, of discretion, even as she meticulously studied the guest list, memorizing names, faces, and potential alliances. This event, she knew, could catapult her from the shadowy world of a billionaire's mistress to a legitimate influencer, a power player in her own right. If she played her cards right. Oh, the delicious possibilities. Unbeknownst to both of them, Isabella Rossi was far from unwell, and certainly not secluded in some distant Italian villa. From her own temporary command center, a discreet suite at the Corinthia Hotel, booked under her maiden name, she was monitoring every detail of the Gala Chunbeat preparations. Her father's networks were extensive, and the Rossi legal team had eyes and ears everywhere. The Blackwood brand, after all, was still half hers, at least on paper. And when she learned, as she inevitably did, that Anastasia Volkov's name was not just whispered but officially on the guest list, a cold fury mixed with a strange, almost exhilarating sense of relief washed over her. Finally, the moment had arrived. She stood before the full-length mirror, the shimmering emerald green gown, a color that spoke of her Rossi heritage and unwavering strength, a perfect armor over her visibly pregnant form. Her hand rested protectively on her belly. We are going to reclaim what's ours, mio caro, she whispered to her unborn child, her voice a steely caress. And we will show them what it means to underestimate a Rossi. The time for quiet suffering was over. The time for action was now. The clock was ticking. The stage was set. The players, knowingly or unknowingly, were moving into their final positions for the most explosive Gala Ethelberg City had ever witnessed. The clock was ticking. The stage was set. The players, knowingly or unknowingly, were moving into their final positions for the most explosive Gala Ethelberg City had ever witnessed. 8 p.m. The Grand Sovereign Hotel's grand ballroom was a glittering ocean of diamonds, couture, and simmering anticipation. Damian Blackwood, resplendent in a custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo, stood near the main entrance. He was the picture of gracious host meets global power broker, shaking hands with politicians, exchanging air kisses with European royalty, and offering those charming, oh-so-confident nods to the tech entrepreneurs he hoped to ensnare in his ever-expanding web of influence. Tonight, he felt, was his night. The air thrummed with possibility, the scent of expensive perfume mingling with the heady aroma of ambition. Across the room, a vision in black velvet embroidered with shimmering gold thread, Anastasia Volkov, glided through the throng. She was a panther in a room full of peacocks, her movements fluid and deliberate. She lingered near influential groups, her voice a low, melodious murmur, switching effortlessly between flawless English and cultured French, depending on her audience. Her eyes, those chips of Siberian ice, missed nothing. Tonight was her unofficial debut into Damian's world, and she intended to make an impression that would last. Every smile was calculated, every handshake a potential alliance forged. She was playing the long game. Always. The ballroom was nearly at capacity, a sea of the world's wealthiest and most powerful. Waiters like silent phantoms circulated with trays of champagne flutes and exquisite hors d'oeuvres. Damian, with a final, satisfied glance around the room, a room that seemed to bow to his very presence, ascended the stage. He tapped the microphone, a small, self-assured smile playing on his lips. His voice, when he spoke, was smooth, measured, carrying the easy authority of a man born to command. He spoke of global education, of new philanthropic initiatives in Africa and Asia, of collaboration and progress. The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. For a fleeting, glorious moment, Damian Blackwood believed he had orchestrated the perfect evening. He was wrong. Dead wrong. The final act of his speech was abruptly, shockingly, cut short. A sudden commotion erupted at the main entrance. Not a polite murmur of a late, important guest arriving, but a tangible shift in the atmosphere, a ripple of unease that spread through the glittering crowd like a crack appearing in a frozen lake. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Photographers, sensing a story far juicier than philanthropic platitudes, scrambled to refocus their lenses. Damian blinked, momentarily blinded by the bright stage lights, a frown creasing his perfect brow. What in God's name was happening? And then he saw her. Isabella Rossi, his wife. The wife he'd relegated to the shadows. The wife he'd assumed was safely tucked away, tending to her personal matters. But the woman who swept into the ballroom was no shrinking violet. She was a queen. Glowing, magnificent, and utterly terrifying in an emerald green gown that clung to the gentle, undeniable curve of her pregnant belly. Her dark hair was swept into a regal chignon, every strand in place, her delicate viridian features a mask of cold, resolute composure that betrayed none of the whirlwind of emotions surely roiling inside her. This was not the heartbroken, weeping woman he'd dismissed so easily. This was a different Isabella. Behind her, like a phalanx of avenging angels, stood 5 imposing men in tailored suits, their faces grim, their eyes scanning the room with professional, unnerving vigilance. Each wore a discreet earpiece. They were clearly her security detail. Her security, not Blackwood's. The implications of that alone sent a fresh wave of shock through the already stunned assembly. Whispers cascaded from one diamond-draped cluster of guests to another. Is that Isabella Blackwood? My God, she is pregnant. And those guards, what on earth is going on? An awkward, almost fearful stillness took hold as people instinctively stepped aside, clearing a path for her as if she were royalty. Or an executioner. She glided forward, her gaze fixed on Damian, a silent, powerful current arcing between them across the suddenly too small ballroom. He remained frozen on stage, his hand still clutching the microphone, his confident smile replaced by a look of dawning horror. Their eyes locked, hers cold and penetrating, his a maelstrom of shock and a rapidly growing dread. Anastasia Volkov, who had been artfully positioned near the edge of the stage, close enough to be seen with Damien, but far enough to maintain a veneer of plausible deniability, instinctively tensed. She caught Isabella's stare. A stare that was cool, assessing, but devoid of hysteria or pleading. It was the look of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, and what she was about to do. Damien finally managed to collect himself, just enough to force a weak, unconvincing smile into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice wavered, the carefully constructed facade cracking. It appears my lovely wife, Isabella, has decided to grace us with her presence this evening." The crowd tittered, a nervous, uncertain sound. Were they witnessing a surprise family reconciliation, or the opening salvo of a very public, very messy war? Isabella walked slowly, methodically, her every step deliberate, until she reached the base of the stage. One of her security guards, with a respectful nod, helped her ascend the few steps. Damien, a puppet master whose strings had just been violently cut, extended a hand toward her, perhaps out of ingrained habit, perhaps a desperate attempt to regain control. She ignored it, completely. The silence in the ballroom was now so profound, so absolute, you could hear the frantic thumping of 100 gilded hearts. Guests shifted uneasily, torn between the ingrained propriety of their class and the irresistible primal urge to witness the impending carnage. Before Damien could reclaim the microphone, Isabella took it from its stand. She turned, not to him, but to the audience. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady, though laced with an emotion so raw, so potent, it sent shivers down every spine in the room. "Good evening, everyone." Her Viridian accent, usually softened by years in Ethelberg City, was more pronounced, a hint of the fire beneath the ice. "I do apologize for the interruption." A small, humorless smile touched her lips. "It seems I'm a little late to my own party, but I believe there are some truths that desperately need to be brought into the light. Right here. Right now." The storm had arrived, and it was about to unleash its full fury. Damien Blackwood was left speechless. Anastasia Volkov, usually so composed, looked as though she'd seen a ghost, or perhaps, more accurately, a beautifully dressed, heavily pregnant fury. The grand ballroom of the Grand Sovereign Hotel, moments before a symphony of polite chatter and clinking champagne flutes, was now utterly, deafeningly silent. The velvet curtain of Ethelberg City's high society had been ripped aside, exposing the raw, ugly drama beneath. And everyone had a front row seat. Team Isabella or pity for Damien? The hashtags exploded across social media before the first illegally snapped photo of Isabella's defiant stance even finished uploading. Blackwood Showdown, Mistress Gate, Gala Warzone, the internet, with its insatiable appetite for scandal, went into overdrive. Memes were born before the night was even over. Damien cowering behind a ridiculously oversized floral arrangement, Isabella brandishing her slim folder of documents like a warrior queen, her sword. The Trianthum media onslaught was immediate and brutal. By morning, Ethelberg City awoke to a firestorm. Tabloid headlines screamed, "Blackwood bombshell, pregnant wife storms Gala, accuses heir," and "Dynasty in disarray, the night the Blackwood empire crumbled." Even the more staid financial papers ran concerned pieces about instability at Blackwood Holdings, quoting anonymous sources who worried about Damien's erratic behavior and the potential fallout from such a public, humiliating scandal. The reactions from the key players were swift and telling. From his sprawling, secluded estate in the countryside, Alistair Blackwood, the aging patriarch of the Blackwood clan, watched the news unfold on a giant plasma screen, his face a mask of cold fury and profound disappointment. He'd known his son was ambitious, perhaps even ruthless, but this was a public circus, a stain on the centuries-old Blackwood name. He immediately summoned his phalanx of Lutsu lawyers, their faces grim. The Blackwood reputation, that precious commodity Alistair had spent a lifetime cultivating, was hemorrhaging. Meanwhile in Viridia, Augusto Rossi, the Viridian lion, was a study in controlled rage. He too had seen the news. His beloved Isabella, dragged through the mud by that Blackwood. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His quiet fury was far more terrifying. He simply picked up the phone and issued a single chilling order to his own formidable legal team. Protect my daughter, and crush anyone who stands in her way. The Rossi machine, a well-oiled engine of corporate warfare, roared to life. They weren't just aiming for a favorable divorce settlement, they were aiming for a strategic dismantling, if necessary. Damian Blackwood, the man at the center of the storm, had vanished. He'd retreated to an undisclosed penthouse owned by a sympathetic and equally terrified board member. His phone switched off, the curtains drawn against the prying eyes of the world. He was, for the first time in his gilded life, truly isolated. His calls to other board members, desperate attempts to rally support, were met with polite but firm refusals. The situation is delicate, Damian. We need to see how this plays out. Even Anastasia Volkov, his supposed partner in this grand new future, couldn't reach him. Her frantic texts, "Damian, what is happening? You promised me," went unanswered. She was, he realized with a sickening lurch, a liability. A beautiful, expensive, and now incredibly public liability. And the market? Oh, the market reacted exactly as one might expect when the heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire self-destructs on a global stage. Blackwood Holdings Cofio stocks plummeted. Investors, spooked by the lurid headlines and the undeniable evidence of instability at the top, ran for the exits. Billions were wiped off the company's value in a matter of hours. The haut consequences were cascading, brutal, and far-reaching. But amidst the financial carnage, a curious pattern began to emerge on the trading floors. As panicked investors dumped their Blackwood stock, a shadowy unknown entity began quietly, almost imperceptibly, buying it up. Large blocks, significant percentages. Curiosity element 3. Who was this mysterious mysterious shareholder? And what was their game? Were they a vulture circling a wounded giant, or was something else, something far more calculated, at play? The air was thick with uncertainty. The public battle had been won, spectacularly, by Isabella. But behind the scenes, in the hushed, wood-paneled offices of Ethelberg City's most powerful law firms, the real war for the Blackwood Empire and for the future was just beginning. The air was thick with uncertainty. The public battle had been won, spectacularly, by Isabella Rossi. But behind the scenes, in the hushed, wood-paneled offices of Ethelberg City's most powerful law firms, the real war for the Blackwood Empire and for the future was just beginning. This wasn't just about a divorce anymore. This was a high-stakes chess game for Queen Kim sought control of a billion-dollar dynasty. She can have the public's pity, she can have their damned applause, but she will not have Blackwood Holdings. Damian Blackwood, holed up in his friend Peter Winfield's Mayfair fortress, spat the words at his beleaguered legal team. Gone was the charming public persona, replaced by a cornered animal, lashing out. His no-look fancon counterattack efforts were immediate and desperate. He tried to rally the old guard of the Blackwood family, distant cousins and ancient board members, appealing to their sense of loyalty, their fear of a Rossi, an outsider, gaining too much influence. He pressured the current board, threatening, cajoling, reminding them of past favors. His lawyers worked frantically, trying to find loopholes, to discredit the ancient trust clauses, to paint Isabella as emotionally unstable, unfit to wield such power. "This is a family matter, a private dispute," he thundered. "Those archaic Duquan Tinthak trust clauses are relics, meaningless in the modern world." But the legal ground was shakier than he'd ever imagined. Isabella, meanwhile, played her hand with a chilling, Rossi-esque precision. Guided by her father, Augusto Rossi, and the formidable Giancarlo Rossi, her chin-look strategy was multifaceted. Legally, they fortified their position, ensuring every I was dotted, every T crossed on the documents asserting her rights. Publicly, Isabella, though still reeling from the betrayal, crafted an image of dignified strength. She gave a single, carefully worded interview to a respected financial journal, not focusing on Damian's infidelity, but on her commitment to the stability and future integrity of Blackwood Holdings for the sake of our child and the legacy we both inherited. It was a masterstroke. She wasn't just a scorned wife, she was a responsible steward, a mother protecting her child's birthright. She garnered the support of key institutional shareholders who were more concerned with the bottom line than marital spats, and whose confidence in Damian was, to put it mildly, shaken. The philanthropic world, where Isabella had quietly built a stellar reputation, rallied to her side. Donations to the Blackwood Foundation, under her interim guidance, actually increased. The Damfan negotiations between the two camps were brutal. Held in neutral territory, the sterile, impersonal conference rooms of Ethelberg City's most expensive law firms, they were less about reconciliation and more about carving up an empire. Lawyers sparred, accusations flew, and fortunes hung in the balance. Damien, stripped of his usual charm, was volatile and unpredictable. Isabella, outwardly calm, was a rock of icy resolve. She would not be broken. She would not yield on the core issues, the protection of her child's inheritance and a significant, undeniable say in the future of the Blackwood legacy. And what of Anastasia Volkov, the catalyst for so much of this destruction? Abandoned. Damien, in his self-preservation mode, had cut her loose without a second thought. Her calls went unanswered, her increasingly desperate messages unread. She was a pariah, a symbol of Damien's folly. The Ethelberg City doors, once so invitingly open, were now slammed firmly in her face. Rumors swirled. Would she sell her sordid story to the highest tabloid bidder? Or would she, like a true survivor, simply disappear, only to resurface later, perhaps in Monte Carlo or Dubai, attached to another unsuspecting billionaire? Her Sofun fate was a salacious footnote in the larger Blackwood-Rossi war. For now, she was simply gone. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come, a twist that would make even the most jaded Ethelberg City observers gasp. Remember that quodam bion, mysterious shareholder, who had been so diligently, so quietly, snapping up Blackwood Holdings' Cofio stock in the wake of the Gala disaster? The one who seemed to be profiting from Damien's downfall? As the stock price continued its downward spiral, their buying became more aggressive. And then, the identity was revealed, not through a press release, but through a strategically leaked filing. The mysterious buyer, the one steadily amassing a formidable stake in Blackwood Holdings, was none other than Augusto Rossi, the Viridian Lion himself. He wasn't just backing his daughter, he was, with methodical brilliance, executing a hostile takeover from within, using Damien's own recklessness as his most potent weapon. The game had changed. Again. The battle lines were drawn, but the war for the Blackwood Empire seemed to have reached a stalemate. A brutal war of attrition, where the only clear loser was the Blackwood name itself. Yet, amidst the legal wrangling and power plays, one undeniable, unshakable factor remained. A tiny, beating heart that could, perhaps, change everything. The child Isabella carried. The battle lines were drawn, but the war for the Blackwood Empire seemed to have reached a stalemate. A brutal war of attrition where the only clear loser was the Blackwood name itself. Yet, amidst the legal wrangling and power plays, one undeniable, unshakable factor remained. A tiny, beating heart that could, perhaps, change everything. The Dutre, child Isabella Rossi carried. The heir to both the Blackwood and Rossi fortunes. I was wrong, Isabella. The words, when Damien Blackwood finally uttered them, were hoarse, almost unrecognizable. They were spoken in yet another sterile boardroom, months after the Gala. The fight had taken its toll on him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a weary, hollowed-out shell of the man he once was. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. The public humiliation, the financial freefall of Blackwood Holdings, the dawning, terrifying realization of just how much he had lost, it had all chipped away at his once impenetrable pride. I was wrong, he repeated, looking not at Isabella, but at his own trembling hands clasped on the mahogany table. But is it too late to fix any of this? For our child? Isabella listened, her expression unreadable. She had changed too. The fiery anger had cooled, replaced by an icy resolve, a quiet strength that seemed to emanate from her very core. The Hoikai repentance, in Damien's voice, if that's what it truly was, registered, but it didn't sway her ultimate course. She had a Tunlai future to build, hers and her child's. The Damfan negotiations shifted then. Subtly at first, then more overtly. The focus moved from assets and percentages to visitation rights and trust funds for the unborn child. Isabella was unyielding on one point. Her child would know both its Blackwood and its Rossi heritage. It would be raised with an understanding of both power and integrity, something its father had clearly forgotten. Her quick decision regarding Damien himself was more complex. She wouldn't destroy him utterly. There was no victory in that, only more ashes. Besides, he was still the father of her child. But a return to the way things were? Impossible. The trust, once so carelessly shattered, could never be fully pieced back together. Some betrayals cut too deep. During this tumultuous period, a surprising olive branch arrived. A handwritten letter from Alistair Blackwood, delivered by a solemn courier. In it, the old patriarch, in his elegant, spidery script, expressed his profound regret for his son's failings and, remarkably, his admiration for Isabella's strength and courage. He hoped, he wrote, that she and his grandchild would always remain a part of the Blackwood legacy, regardless of the outcome of her marriage to Damien. The letter, so unexpected, so human, moved Isabella to tears. It was a flicker of warmth in the icy landscape of her new reality. 6 months after the infamous Gala. 6 months of legal battles, public scrutiny, and private anguish. The Blackwood Foundation was hosting another major event, a global forum on digital education. But this time, the woman who took the podium was not the timid, overshadowed wife. It was Isabella Rossi, now visibly, gloriously pregnant, her emerald green gown a bold statement of her power and resilience. She spoke eloquently, passionately, about bridging technological divides, about empowering disadvantaged communities. She commanded the stage, her voice clear and strong. She received a standing ovation. The Queen-look power in the room had palpably shifted. She was now the face of the Blackwood Foundation, at least its more palatable, forward-thinking side. Damien Blackwood was conspicuous by his absence. Officially, he was focusing on restructuring certain Blackwood Holdings assets. Unofficially, he was in a self-imposed exile, working behind the scenes, licking his wounds, perhaps even soul-searching? The Ethelberg city gossips were divided. Was it a forced retreat or a genuine attempt at hoi kai, repentance? Anastasia Volkov, meanwhile, had reportedly surfaced in Monte Carlo, already attached to a new, older, and arguably wealthier benefactor. Some creatures always land on their feet. The Kituk-Mo, open ending of the Blackwood Rossi saga was still being written. Would they divorce? Would Damien ever truly redeem himself in Isabella's eyes, or in the eyes of the world? Could he rebuild what he had so spectacularly destroyed? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Isabella Rossi was no longer a pawn in anyone's game. She held her destiny, and that of her son, firmly in her own capable hands. The child she carried, the product of such a tempestuous union, would inherit a complicated legacy. A legacy not of silent compliance, but of bold confrontation. A legacy where betrayal was met head-on, and where power, in the blink of an eye, could shift in the most unexpected of ways. The child Isabella Rossi carried, the product of such a tempestuous union, would inherit a complicated legacy, a legacy not of silent compliance, but of bold confrontation. A legacy where Fanbo betrayal was met head-on, and where Quinlook power, in the blink of an eye, could shift in the most unexpected of ways. But does a happily ever after truly exist in the rarefied, often ruthless world of the Blackwoods and Rossis? Probably not. What does exist, however, what endures beyond the shattered vows and broken hearts, is power, and the unyielding strength of a woman who refused to be a victim. So what became of our players in this high-stakes game of love, lies, and legacy? The dust, as they say, eventually began to settle, though the landscape of their lives was forever altered. The Ethelberg city scandal simmered down, replaced by newer, fresher dramas for the insatiable public to consume. But for those involved, the echoes of that fateful Gala would resonate for years to come. Isabella Rossi, now the undisputed matriarch of a significant portion of the Blackwood Empire, and with the formidable backing of her father, Augusto Rossi, and his ever-expanding Rossi Industries, didn't just survive, she thrived. She became a force to be reckoned with, not just in the boardrooms, but in the philanthropic world she had always championed. She poured her energy, her intellect, and her considerable resources into the Blackwood Foundation, reshaping it, giving it a new, more transparent, and arguably more impactful direction. She proved to be more than just a beautiful face or a wronged wife. She was a brilliant chin-look strategist, a compassionate leader, and a devoted mother to young Alessandro Rossi Blackwood. Her quitting decision to not completely financially cripple Damien, while never allowing him back into her heart, spoke volumes of her character. a blend of Viridian pragmatism and an almost regal magnanimity. She understood that her son, despite everything, carried the Blackwood name. And Damien Blackwood? The golden boy, so publicly tarnished? His journey was more complicated. The initial hoi kai, repentance, born perhaps more out of shock and the terror of losing everything, slowly, painstakingly, began to evolve into something that might, just might, resemble genuine self-awareness. He spent years in a self-imposed exile from the Ethelberg city spotlight, working on the fringes of the Blackwood Empire, rebuilding, piece by painful piece, not just his business reputation, but his shattered sense of self. Did he find true redemption? That, dear reader, is a question perhaps only he could answer. The Kidtook open ending of his story is one of an ongoing struggle, a struggle against his own demons, against the shadow of his past, and for a chance, however slim, to earn the respect, if not the love, of his son. Their relationship was complex, a delicate dance of tentative truce and unspoken resentments, managed with cautious optimism by Isabella. Alistair Blackwood, the old lion, never fully recovered from the public disgrace his son had brought upon the family name. He passed away a few years after the Gala, his final letter to Isabella a poignant acknowledgement of her strength and a lament for Damien's weaknesses. His words, "You are more of a Blackwood than he ever was," were a bittersweet epitaph for a dying era. As for Anastasia Volkov, sightings were sporadic, always in the most glamorous, most exclusive corners of the world. A casino in Monte Carlo, a private yacht off the coast of Mykonos, a discreet table at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Paris. She remained a creature of mystery, forever seeking her next mark, her next thrill, a beautiful, dangerous ghost in the opulent playground of the super-rich. Did she ever feel a twinge of remorse for the chaos she'd helped unleash? Unlikely. Some people are just built to watch the world burn as long as they're holding the most expensive match. The Disan legacy of that stormy night at the Grand Sovereign Hotel was profound. It served as a stark reminder that even the most formidable empires are built on human foundations, and human foundations, as we all know, are inherently flawed. Love, betrayal, ambition, revenge. These are the timeless, powerful currents that shape our destinies, whether we live in a palace or a hovel. The Blackwood Rossi saga, with its twists and turns, its public shaming and private heartbreaks, became a modern-day morality tale whispered in the gilded cages of high society. What do you think happened next? Did Damien ever truly earn his son's forgiveness? Did Isabella find a new love? Or did she dedicate her life solely to her child and her empire? And what of Anastasia? Will she ever face a reckoning? Drop your theories, your hopes, your judgments in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. If this tale of wealth, power, and passion has captivated you, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your fellow drama lovers, and subscribe for more deep dives into the intoxicating and often treacherous world of the rich and infamous. Because in the dazzling realm of the global elite, one thing is certain. Every glittering diamond can hide a universe of secrets. Every perfectly crafted smile can mask a heart full of pain, and every storm, no matter how destructive, eventually gives way to a new, uncertain, but undeniably altered dawn. And the most important Bihawk lesson? True Sigmynth isn't about how much you have, but how you wield it, especially when the world is watching. Keep your eyes open, because the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows.